Chapter 1: The Basement Rat Bites Back. The cold had already seeped into my bones by the time the snow apocalypse began. For 2 days, I had been locked in the basement of the Rashid mansion. The reason? Their youngest daughter had claimed I pinched her arm. A lie. There were cameras in every hallway, every room, even the corridor where I slept. The footage would have proven my innocence instantly. But Mr. Rashid and Mrs. Haida had never cared about the truth. Truth was inconvenient. Punishing me was easier. For 3 years, they had refused to pay my salary. They had taken my passport, my ID, and my phone. Every time I mentioned returning to Country M, Mrs. Haida would smile sweetly and say, soon. Soon never came. Instead came beatings, insults, and confinement. Now I sat in darkness while a blizzard buried the city outside. The house trembled as icy winds screamed against the walls. Then, shortly after sunset, I heard soft footsteps. A knock. Maya, a young voice whispered. I immediately recognized it. Omar. The middle child. The only member of the family who had ever shown me kindness. I hurried to the door. Omar? The lock clicked softly. The door opened a crack. His frightened face appeared. Hurry. He slid a small backpack through the gap. Inside were several protein bars and 2 bottles of water. What are you doing? I asked. His eyes filled with guilt. I heard my parents talking. My heart sank. What did they say? Omar lowered his head. They're going to throw you outside tomorrow night. Silence. The wind outside howled. I felt absolutely nothing. No shock. No fear. No sadness. Because deep down, I had always known this day would come. The apocalypse had simply given them an excuse. They planned to throw me into a snowstorm and pretend it wasn't murder. Omar's voice trembled. I'm sorry. I placed a hand on his shoulder. It isn't your fault. Tears appeared in his eyes. Then he quickly left before anyone could discover him. The lock clicked shut again. I sat motionless in the darkness. Then I slowly smiled. Because Omar had unknowingly reminded me of something. Months ago, during another punishment, I had discovered a hidden door concealed behind old shelves. Curiosity had led me through it. The passage connected directly to the mansion's massive pantry. Mrs. Haida had always been obsessed with apocalypse preparation. The pantry contained enough food to feed dozens of people for years. Shelves packed with canned goods, water purifiers, generators, medical supplies, seeds, blankets, fuel, everything. And during my explorations, I had discovered something even more valuable. An emergency security override. A feature designed to lock the basement and pantry from the inside during disasters. Once activated, the security doors could not be opened from outside without a master key. And I knew exactly where the master key was. A wicked smile slowly spread across my face. Outside, the storm grew stronger. The world was freezing. Civilization was collapsing. And tomorrow night, Mr. Rashid and Mrs. Haida intended to throw me away like garbage. Very well. Let them try. They believed they were imprisoning a helpless nanny. They had forgotten something. Rats survive when empires fall. And for 3 years, they had treated me worse than a rat. I stood and walked toward the hidden door. The revenge I had dreamed about for years was finally within reach. Soon the snow would trap everyone inside this mansion. Soon food would become more valuable than gold. Soon they would discover that the person controlling the pantry controlled their lives. And when they came begging, I would make them remember every slap, every insult, every day they stole my freedom. Every night I cried alone in this basement. The storm raged outside. I opened the hidden door and stepped into the darkness with a smile. Chapter 2: Alone No More. The moment I activated the emergency override, a heavy metallic thud echoed through the hidden passage. Lockdown activated. A small green light turned red. The basement and pantry were now sealed. No one upstairs could enter. No one could take what was mine. For the first time in 3 years, I felt safe. I stood there for several seconds, staring at the glowing red light. Then I laughed. A quiet laugh at first. Then a louder one. Not because anything was funny, but because for the first time in years, I was no longer the trapped one. They were. My stomach growled. I had barely eaten during the 2 days they had locked me up. The pantry contained a small emergency kitchen, one Mrs. Haida had installed. For the apocalypse. She had always been preparing for. How ironic. The preparations she made to save her family would now save me instead. I opened cupboards and drawers. Rice, beans, dried vegetables, spices, cooking oil, canned meat. The sight nearly brought tears to my eyes. For years, I had survived on leftovers while preparing expensive meals for the Rashid family. Tonight, I cooked for myself. A steaming bowl of rice with vegetables and meat. Simple. Warm. Perfect. I sat alone at the small table and ate slowly. Every bite spread warmth through my body. Every bite felt like freedom. When the meal was finished, I washed the dishes carefully. Then I explored the storage room further. One section contained emergency supplies. Heavy winter coats. Thermal clothing. Wool blankets. Snow boots. Gloves. Mrs. Haida had purchased enough equipment for an entire neighborhood. I changed immediately. The soft thermal layers felt wonderful against my cold skin. Soon I was warmer than I had been in months. I wrapped myself in a thick blanket and sat near one of the emergency heaters. Outside, the wind screamed. The storm had become a monster. Snow pounded against the house. The temperature continued to fall. The apocalypse had truly begun. And yet, for the first time, I wasn't afraid. My thoughts drifted backward. Back to the reason all this had happened. The reason they had chosen me. The reason they believed they could do anything they wanted. Because I was alone. No parents. No husband. No brothers. No sisters. No children. No powerful relatives. No one who would ask questions if I disappeared. No one who would come looking. No one who would fight for me. Mr. Rashid had once said it himself during an argument with his wife. I had overheard them. Who cares about her? Nobody does. The words had burned into my memory. Nobody does. Mrs. Haida had agreed. That's why she's useful. Useful. Not human. Not a person. Just a tool. A servant. Someone who could be worked, beaten, and discarded. A tear rolled down my cheek. Then another. I quickly wiped them away. No. I was done crying for them. Done begging for kindness. Done hoping they would suddenly become decent people. The old me had believed that if I worked hard enough, obeyed enough, endured enough, things would improve. The old me was dead. Outside, something crashed. I heard shouting faintly through the floor. The family upstairs. Panic. Fear. Confusion. Perhaps the power had flickered. Perhaps they had finally realized the severity of the storm. Good. Let them be afraid. I had spent 3 years afraid. Now it was their turn. I lay down on a pile of blankets and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in years, I wasn't wondering how to survive tomorrow. I was planning. Calculating. Preparing. Because eventually they would discover the pantry was inaccessible. Eventually they would realize where all their supplies had gone. Eventually they would come to the basement door. And when that happened, they would find that the lonely nanny they had treated like garbage was the one holding the keys to survival. The snow continued to fall. And upstairs, the Rashid family had no idea that their world was about to change forever. Chapter 3: The Hidden Kingdom. The next morning, I woke up warm, rested, and well-fed. A feeling I had almost forgotten. Upstairs, however, chaos had already begun. I watched everything from one of the monitoring screens I had discovered hidden inside the emergency bunker. The screen showed every camera in the house. Living rooms. Hallways. Bedrooms. The kitchen. The garage. Even cameras outside the mansion. Mrs. Haida stormed into the pantry entrance carrying a ring of keys. She entered a code. Nothing. She tried again. Nothing. A third time. Still nothing. Her face turned red. What is wrong with this thing? She shouted. Mr. Rashid arrived moments later. He tried the code himself. The heavy security door remained firmly shut. They spent the next hour attempting various overrides. Nothing worked. I nearly laughed myself breathless. The emergency lockdown was functioning exactly as designed. The only difference was that the person controlling it wasn't supposed to be me. Call maintenance. Mrs. Haida snapped. Mr. Rashid stared at her. The entire city is shut down. Silence. Outside the cameras showed endless snow. Roads buried. Cars abandoned. The storm growing stronger by the hour. No maintenance team was coming. No technician was coming. No rescue was coming. For the first time, they were forced to rely entirely on themselves. And unfortunately for them, the person who controlled most of their emergency supplies hated them. For an entire week they fought with the pantry door. Every day. Every single day. Codes. Keys. Manual overrides. Security panels. Even trying to force the mechanism. Nothing worked. They became increasingly frustrated. Meanwhile, they still assumed I was trapped helplessly in the basement. The possibility that I had seized control never even crossed their minds. Their arrogance blinded them. After all, why would a nanny understand their security system? Why would a servant know their secrets? Because unlike them, I paid attention. While they wasted energy fighting the pantry door, I explored my new territory. And what I discovered left me speechless. This wasn't merely a pantry. It was a luxury apocalypse bunker. An underground fortress. A hidden kingdom. 1. Room contained rows of batteries connected to a sophisticated solar power system. I spent hours studying the diagrams. The realization made me grin. Even if the entire city lost electricity, the bunker would continue operating. Solar panels hidden across the property supplied power to massive battery banks. Lights, heating, computers, security systems. Everything. The apocalypse could last years. I would still have electricity. Mrs. Haida truly had been obsessed with preparing for disaster. Too bad she never imagined disaster would involve me. The discoveries continued. Another room held surveillance equipment. High-end drones. Professional cameras. Night vision equipment. Motion sensors. Communication devices. I tested several drones and found they still worked perfectly. Soon I was using them to scout the property and monitor the surrounding streets. The outside world looked terrifying. Snowdrifts taller than vehicles. Frozen roads. Abandoned houses. No signs of normal life. The world beyond the mansion was slowly disappearing beneath white ice. Then I discovered the entertainment storage room. I stood frozen in the doorway. Shelves. Rows and rows of shelves. Electronics everywhere. At first I thought I was seeing things. Then I started counting. 30 iPads. 59 laptops. Gaming consoles. Projectors. Portable hard drives. Headphones. And 4 enormous cartons filled with smartphones. I gave up counting after the first 100 phones. Most were still sealed in their original packaging. Mrs. Haida had apparently prepared for every possible apocalypse scenario, including one where she needed enough electronics to start a small store. I picked up an iPad. Movies. Thousands of them. Television series. Documentaries. Books. Educational courses. Offline maps. Music libraries. The bunker contained enough entertainment to last decades. One laptop contained hundreds of installed games. Another held downloaded movies. A third contained survival manuals. I laughed. For 3 years they had treated me like a slave. Now I was sitting in a heated underground fortress with unlimited food, electricity, entertainment, and security. And above me? The Rashid family was rationing snacks. Because they couldn't reach their main food reserves. Every evening I watched them through the cameras. Mr. Rashid growing angrier. Mrs. Haida becoming more frantic. The children becoming increasingly hungry and frightened. Only Omar remained calm. Sometimes I caught him glancing toward the basement door with a thoughtful expression. Almost as if he suspected something. Almost as if he knew I was smarter than his parents believed. One night, exactly 7 days after the lockdown began, I watched Mrs. Haida slam her fist against the pantry door. Her face twisted with frustration. "We spent years preparing for this," Mr. Rashid shouted back. "Then why doesn't anything work?" The two began arguing loudly. Blaming each other. Accusing each other. Panicking. I leaned back in my comfortable chair, sipping hot chocolate made from their supplies. A smile spread across my face. The snow continued to fall. The apocalypse continued. And while the masters of the house were slowly losing control, the forgotten nanny was quietly becoming the true ruler of the mansion. Chapter 4, The Choice. 3 weeks changed everything. The storm never stopped. The world outside remained frozen and silent. Inside the mansion, desperation slowly consumed the Rashid family. Through the cameras, I watched their supplies disappear one by one. Arguments became daily occurrences. Fear lingered in every room. Then one evening, an intruder broke into the house. A desperate survivor seeking shelter from the endless snow. The encounter ended violently. Afterward, Mr. Rashid and Mrs. Haida made a terrible choice. A choice born from fear, selfishness, and the belief that survival justified anything. The children were horrified. Even the oldest could barely look at their parents afterward. For weeks, the household existed under a dark cloud of silence and dread. No one laughed. No one smiled. The younger children clung to Omar whenever they were frightened. And Omar watched his parents with growing fear. Then, after 3 weeks, their food source was gone. The cameras showed Mr. Rashid and Mrs. Haida sitting at the dining table long after midnight, whispering, calculating, looking toward the hallway where the children slept. A chill ran through me. I knew that look. I had seen it directed at me for years. The look that said someone else's life was less important than their own comfort. The next morning, Omar seemed to understand too. His face had become pale. His eyes never left his younger siblings. That was when I made my decision. I owed the Rashid family nothing. But Omar had slipped me food when I was starving. He had warned me when they planned to throw me outside. Without him, I might never have had time to prepare. So that night, I used one of the bunker's communication tablets connected to the house network. A single message appeared on Omar's old tablet. "If you want to save your brothers and sisters, bring them to the basement door at midnight. Come quietly. Tell no one. Hours passed. I waited in front of the security monitors. The clock ticked slowly. 11:30. 11:45. 11:58. Then movement. Omar stepped into the hallway. The youngest child held his hand. The others followed close behind. All four looked terrified. They moved silently through the dark house. Every few seconds Omar glanced over his shoulder. The children reached the basement door exactly at midnight. I unlocked it remotely. The heavy door opened just enough for them to slip through. The youngest girl immediately burst into tears. She looked thinner than before. Much thinner. It's okay, I whispered. You are safe now. The children stared at me. For a moment nobody moved. Then Omar spoke. You really did it. I nodded. Come inside. The door closed behind them. And then I activated the locks once more. A loud metallic clang echoed through the bunker. The security indicators turned red. Locked. Secure. Safe. The children jumped at the sound. What was that? One of them asked. It means nobody can get in. For the first time in weeks, relief appeared on Omar's face. I led them deeper into the bunker. The younger children stopped in amazement. Warm lights. Heated rooms. Food. Water. Blankets. Games. Movies. Comfort. An entire hidden world beneath the house. The youngest child stared at the shelves filled with supplies. So much food. I handed her a bowl of hot soup. She began crying again. This time from relief. The others quickly joined her at the table. For several minutes, nobody spoke. They simply ate. Slowly. Carefully. As though they feared the food might disappear. I sat nearby and watched. Above us, Mr. Rashid and Mrs. Haida slept peacefully. Unaware that all of their children had vanished. Unaware that the people they believed they controlled were now beyond their reach. Unaware that the bunker they had built for their own survival had become a sanctuary for the very people they had mistreated. For the first time since the apocalypse began, the bunker no longer felt empty. And for the first time in my life, I realized something surprising. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I had always believed. Chapter 5, The One We Left Behind. The children ate until their stomachs were full. For the younger ones, it was the first proper meal they had enjoyed in weeks. Warm soup. Fresh bread. Hot chocolate. Simple things that now felt like treasures. For a little while, the bunker felt peaceful. The youngest girl was watching a cartoon on one of the tablets. Another child had fallen asleep wrapped in blankets. Omar sat quietly at the table. As always, he wasn't acting like a child. He never had. Though he was the middle child. Years of living in that house had forced him to grow up too quickly. While his older brother had often avoided family problems, Omar had been the one comforting his siblings. Protecting them. Taking responsibility. For things that should never have been placed on a child's shoulders. As I watched him, I noticed his expression suddenly change. His face went pale. He stood up so quickly that his chair tipped over. No. The word came out as a whisper. Then louder. No. The younger children stared at him. Omar? His breathing became uneven. We forgot someone. A terrible feeling settled in my chest. Who? My brother. The room froze. The oldest. My blood ran cold. Everyone had been so focused on getting the younger children out safely that nobody had noticed. The oldest son hadn't come with them. He wasn't in the bunker. He wasn't upstairs. He wasn't anywhere in the house. Then I remembered something. Earlier that evening, I had seen him arguing with Mr. Rashid. At the time, I hadn't paid much attention. Now dread filled my stomach. I rushed to the monitoring room. Omar, come with me. The camera recordings began replaying across the screens. We watched in silence. Then we found it. Hours before midnight. The oldest son standing in the entrance hall. Shouting. His father shouting back. His mother screaming at both of them. Then the boy said something that made even Omar gasp. I won't let you touch them. The room fell silent. Even through the recording, his fear was obvious. Mr. Rashid's face darkened. The argument escalated. Then came the moment that made my hands clench into fists. Mr. Rashid opened the front door. A blast of snow entered the house. And he pushed his own son outside. The boy stumbled into the storm. The door slammed shut behind him. Mrs. Haida didn't stop it. She simply turned away. The recording ended. The younger children began crying. Omar stared at the screen. Completely motionless. No. His voice broke. No, no, no. I immediately switched to the outdoor cameras. Most showed nothing but endless snow. Visibility was terrible. The storm had buried nearly everything. Then one camera detected movement. Far from the house. A dark figure. Walking. Stumbling. Falling. Then standing again. My heart nearly stopped. It's him. Omar rushed forward. He's alive? Omar, we have to help him. The boy on the screen suddenly collapsed into the snow. Not moving. The room became silent. Omar's face lost all color. I immediately grabbed one of the drone controllers. The bunker's equipment included thermal imaging drones. Equipment Mrs. Haida had purchased for survival scenarios. Now it would save the son she had abandoned. I launched the drone. The screen flickered to life. The machine rose into the snowy darkness. Beside me, Omar clenched his fists. For the first time since entering the bunker, he looked his age. Not mature. Not responsible. Just a frightened boy worried about his brother. And as the drone raced into the storm, every person in the room prayed for the same thing. Please still be alive. Chapter 6, Reunited. The drone reached Ethan's location just in time. The thermal camera showed a faint heat signature beneath a mound of snow. He was still alive. Barely. I immediately activated the drone's emergency beacon and used its speaker. Ethan. Stay awake. We're coming. There was no response. The heat signature remained motionless. Omar's face turned white. We have to hurry. Fortunately, the bunker had another secret Mrs. Haida had prepared for the apocalypse, a reinforced emergency tunnel leading to a concealed exit some distance from the house. She had planned it as an escape route. Tonight, it would become a rescue route. I bundled myself into the warmest gear available while Omar insisted on coming with me. No, I said firmly. You stay with your siblings. He's my brother. And if something happens to you, what then? Omar looked torn. Finally, he nodded. Bring him back. I will. The storm was brutal. Even with proper gear, every step felt like walking through a wall of ice. Guided by the drone's thermal feed, I pushed forward until I found him. Ethan lay half buried in the snow. His lips were blue. His eyelashes were coated with frost. But when I checked his pulse, it was there. Weak. Slow. But there. Relief flooded through me. You're stubborn, I muttered. Using an emergency sled from the bunker, I secured him and began the difficult journey back. By the time we reached the hidden tunnel entrance, my muscles felt like they were on fire. But Ethan was alive. That was all that mattered. Back in the bunker, chaos erupted. The moment the door opened and the children saw the sled, they rushed forward. Ethan. Their voices echoed through the room. The younger children immediately burst into tears. Omar was the first to reach him. For the first time since I had known him, the composed middle child completely lost control. Tears streamed down his face. You idiot, he whispered. You stupid idiot. His voice cracked. You should have come with us. Ethan's eyes slowly opened. For several seconds, he seemed confused. Then he saw his siblings. A weak smile appeared. You guys are loud. The youngest child threw herself into his arms. The others quickly followed. Within seconds, all 5 children were piled around him. Laughing. Crying. Talking over one another. Touching his hands and shoulders as if reassuring themselves he was real. Alive. Safe. Together. I quietly stepped back. Watching from a distance. For years, I had cared for these children. Fed them. Comforted them. Protected them when I could. Yet this was the first time I had ever seen all 5 truly united. Not as spoiled children. Not as the offspring of wealthy parents. Just brothers and sisters who loved one another. Ethan eventually looked toward me. His expression became serious. Omar told me. Told you what? That you saved them. His eyes lowered. And now you saved me. The room grew quiet. The children looked at me. Waiting. I wasn't used to that. People usually looked at me to give orders. Not gratitude. You don't need to thank me, I said. Yes, we do, Ethan replied. His voice was weak but firm. You didn't have to help us. The younger children nodded vigorously. Even Omar smiled. A genuine smile. One I had rarely seen. For a moment, emotion threatened to overwhelm me. 3 years ago, I had arrived at this house completely alone. 3 years later, during the end of the world, I found myself surrounded by 5 children who looked at me like family. The realization was strange, comforting, and a little frightening. Because family meant responsibility. It meant caring. It meant opening your heart. Something I had sworn never to do again. Yet as I watched the 5 siblings huddled together beneath warm blankets, safe at last, I realized something. The Rashids had spent years convincing me that I was alone. That nobody cared. That nobody would stand beside me. They were wrong. Very wrong. Above us, Mr. Rashid and Mrs. Haida still ruled an empty house. Below, hidden beneath layers of snow and steel, the people they had tried to control had found one another. And for the first time since the apocalypse began, the bunker felt less like a shelter, and more like a home. Chapter 7, Peace Below, Madness Above. Life in the bunker slowly settled into a routine. For the first time in months, the children slept through the night without fear. Every morning, Ethan helped check supplies. Omar organized lessons for his younger siblings using the educational programs stored on the laptops. The younger children spent their afternoons watching movies, reading books, and playing games. There was laughter again. Arguments over board games. Complaints about chores. The ordinary sounds of a family. The bunker, once a lonely prison, had become a home. Above us, however, the mansion was descending into chaos. Every day I monitored the security cameras. Every day Mr. Rashid and Mrs. Haida searched the house. They checked every room, every closet, every storage area. They called the children's names repeatedly. At first, they were confused. Then worried. Then desperate. One evening, we watched them review old camera footage. The moment they realized all 5 children had vanished during the night, panic spread across their faces. They couldn't have left the house, Mrs. Haida said. The storm would have killed them. Mr. Rashid slammed his fist against the table. Then where are they? Days passed. The searches became more frantic. The mansion echoed with shouting. Doors were kicked open. Furniture was overturned. Neither parent ever came close to discovering the hidden bunker. The children occasionally watched the monitors. Not because they missed their parents, but because they needed to understand something. The truth. One night, Ethan sat beside me in the monitoring room. We watched as his parents argued in the kitchen. The storm raged outside. Inside, their fear had turned into something ugly. They only think about themselves, Ethan said quietly. I didn't answer. Because he was right. The cameras showed Mr. Rashid and Mrs. Haida discussing survival, supplies, and their future. They barely spoke about their children's safety anymore. Instead, they talked about what would happen after the crisis ended. How they would rebuild their lives. How they would start over. How they would eventually have another family if necessary. Watching them, Ethan's expression hardened. They've already replaced us in their minds. I looked at him. Does that hurt? He was silent for a long moment. Not anymore. His gaze shifted toward the living area where his siblings were laughing over a movie. Because now I know who my real family is. For a second, I couldn't speak. Then Ethan smiled slightly. You. The word caught me off guard. You, Omar, and the others. From across the room, Omar overheard and rolled his eyes. Don't make it sound so dramatic. The younger children immediately joined in. It is true. Your family. We vote that your family. The bunker erupted into laughter. Even I couldn't help smiling. Above us, the mansion remained cold, empty, and full of fear. Below us, hidden beneath layers of steel and snow, something stronger was growing. Trust. Safety. Belonging. The Rashids had spent years believing that family was something they could control. Something they could replace whenever convenient. They never understood what family actually was. Family wasn't blood. Family wasn't ownership. Family was the people who protected you when they didn't have to. The people who stayed when leaving would have been easier. And as the snow continued to bury the world outside, the children and I slowly built exactly that. Chapter 8, New Skills, Old Wounds. Winter stretched on. The world outside remained buried beneath endless snow. Inside the bunker, life continued. The children studied every day. They exercised. They learned practical skills. And for the first time in years, they lived without constantly worrying about punishment. As for me, I decided that survival wasn't enough. I wanted a future. The bunker held hundreds of educational courses stored on the laptops and tablets. Business management, accounting, programming, cybersecurity, economics, languages. Every day after breakfast, I spent hours learning. At first, coding seemed impossible. Lines of symbols filled the screen. Errors appeared constantly. Nothing worked. But I refused to quit. The same determination that had helped me survive 3 years of abuse pushed me forward. Day after day, I studied. Soon I was building simple programs. Then websites. Then more complex projects. Business management fascinated me as well. I learned about leadership, finance, operations, negotiations, and investment. The more I learned, the angrier I became. Not because of what I was studying. Because I realized how much potential I had wasted while being trapped in the Rashid household. For years they had treated me as if I were stupid. As if I existed only to clean, cook, and obey. Yet every day I mastered subjects they had never bothered to understand. One afternoon, while I was working through a business course, Omar entered the study room. He looked unusually serious. Can I talk to you? I closed my laptop. Of course. He sat down quietly. For a while he stared at the floor. Then he finally spoke. Our parents weren't just cruel to you. I frowned. What do you mean? Omar let out a bitter laugh. They were cruel to all of us. That conversation changed everything. Over the next several weeks, the children slowly began sharing things they had never told anyone before. Not even each other. Ethan spoke first. As the oldest, he had always been expected to be perfect. Perfect grades. Perfect behavior. Perfect achievements. Whenever he failed, Mr. Rashid humiliated him. Whenever he succeeded, his accomplishments were treated as expected. Nothing was ever enough. The pressure had been relentless. The second oldest child revealed how. Mrs. Haida constantly compared her to other children. Smarter children. Prettier children. More talented children. No matter what she accomplished, she was always told someone else was better. The younger children described being manipulated through guilt and fear. They were taught that love had to be earned. That mistakes made them unworthy. That obedience mattered more than happiness. Then Omar finally told his story. In many ways, his was the hardest to hear. Because Omar had become the family's emotional caretaker. Whenever his parents fought, he comforted his siblings. Whenever someone cried, he was there. Whenever one of the children was punished unfairly, Omar tried to protect them. He had been forced into the role of an adult long before he should have been. Sometimes, he admitted quietly, "I wished I could just be a kid." The room fell silent. No one knew what to say. Because every child understood exactly what he meant. The youngest girl eventually crawled into his lap and hugged him tightly. "You can be one now." Omar laughed. A real laugh. The kind children are supposed to have. Not the careful smile of someone carrying too much responsibility. For the first time, his eyes looked lighter. Less burdened. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I sat alone in the monitoring room. The cameras still showed the mansion above. Mr. Rashid and Mrs. Haida continued blaming everyone except themselves. They complained. They argued. They searched for people to blame. But they never once asked why their children had chosen not to come back. Not once. Because deep down, they already knew the answer. The children hadn't run away from safety. They had escaped from pain. I looked toward the sleeping quarters. Toward Ethan. Toward Omar. Toward the younger children. They had endured years of emotional wounds that no camera could record and no bruise could reveal. Yet despite everything, they were kind. Resilient. Strong. A small smile appeared on my face. I turned back to my laptop and opened another coding lesson. The children were rebuilding their lives. So was I. And while the world outside remained frozen, something warm was growing inside the bunker. Hope. Chapter 9, The Breaking Point Above. The storm outside the mansion had not eased. If anything, it had become harsher, wind like shattered glass. Snow piling against the walls in thick, suffocating layers. Inside the bunker, life continued in its strange new rhythm. Lessons in the morning. Coding in the afternoon. Stories at night. The children were no longer just surviving, they were becoming something new. But above us, the world of the Rashids was collapsing. It started with strangers. A convoy arrived at the mansion gates one morning, armed men in heavy coats. Faces hardened by months of survival. A militia. They had heard rumors of the estate. A large house. Possible supplies. Shelter. Food. Mr. Rashid met them at the door with desperate energy. For the first time, he was not the man in control. He was begging. "There are supplies here," he told them quickly. "A pantry stocked for survival. Enough for all of us." The militia leader narrowed his eyes. "Then why haven't you used it?" Mr. Rashid hesitated just a fraction too long. That hesitation sealed his credibility. Still, greed was louder than suspicion. They agreed to help him access it. Down in the bunker, I watched everything unfold through the cameras. The militia gathered in the hallway outside the pantry entrance. Tools came out. Crowbars. Electronic scanners. One man examined the security panel carefully. "It's advanced," he muttered. "Very advanced." My fingers tightened slightly on the table. If they forced the wrong sequence, they would trigger lockdown defenses. And potentially damage the system. I leaned forward. But then they stopped. One of them shook his head. "Forget it. Not worth it. Too complicated." They backed away. The pantry door remained sealed. Safe. Unbreached. Omar exhaled beside me. "They almost got in." I nodded slowly. Almost doesn't matter. But something about it unsettled me. The outside world was getting closer. Tension grew rapidly after that. The militia stayed in the house. Days turned into arguments. Arguments turned into suspicion. Mr. Rashid tried to assert control again, ordering them around as if he still held authority. It did not work. Men like that did not obey weakness. And Mrs. Haida was watching everything carefully. Too carefully. She had always been the more calculating one. And she noticed something important. The militia was not loyal. They were hungry. They were cold. And they were watching every resource, including Mr. Rashid. The betrayal came suddenly. One night, I watched from the monitors as voices rose in the kitchen. A heated argument. Then shouting. Then chaos. Mrs. Haida stood behind the militia leader, her expression calm in a way that made my stomach tighten. Mr. Rashid backed away, realizing too late that something had shifted. You turned them against me, he said. Mrs. Haida tilted her head. You did that yourself. The militia leader stepped forward. Your supplies are insufficient for everyone. Someone has to decide how they're distributed. Mr. Rashid laughed nervously. I own this house. Silence. Then one of the men spoke. Not anymore. The situation collapsed in seconds. A struggle. A shove. A weapon raised. And just like that, Mr. Rashid fell. The man who had controlled everything in that house was gone. In the bunker, the children watched the feed in stunned silence. Even Ethan didn't speak. Omar looked away first. The youngest child whispered, Is he gone? I nodded once. Yes. No celebration followed. No relief. Only stillness. Because even if he had been cruel, even if he had been violent, he had still been part of their world. And now that world was changing again. Upstairs, Mrs. Haida stood very still as chaos unfolded around her. The militia argued over control of the house. Supplies. Authority. Survival. But she wasn't looking at them. She was looking at the pantry door. At the bunker beneath her feet. As if she could sense something was there. Something she could not reach. Something that had already escaped her forever. Chapter 10, Control Shifts. The mansion did not fall into peace after Mr. Rashid's death. It fell into order, but a cold, dangerous kind of order. The militia took control within hours. They sealed exits, rationed supplies, and turned the house into a fortified command post against the storm outside. What had once been the Rashid family home was now a survival base. And Mrs. Haida, who had always believed she understood control better than anyone, learned quickly that she no longer had any. In the bunker, we watched everything unfold through the cameras. No more shouting matches between the couple. No more arguments about authority. Now there were only commands and compliance. Mrs. Haida was assigned tasks immediately. Inventory. Cleaning. Food distribution. Maintenance of the upper floors. Not because anyone respected her position, but because she knew the house better than anyone else. Her knowledge had value. But only under supervision. She moved through the mansion like a shadow of her former self, still sharp. Still observant, but stripped of influence. Every action was watched. Every mistake corrected. Every attempt at resistance ignored. Omar watched the screen quietly. She doesn't look like her anymore, he said. Ethan responded flatly, she never knew how to survive without control. No one argued with him. Days passed. Then something changed. The militia stopped behaving like temporary guests. They began organizing. Mapping the house. Setting up guard rotations. Creating supply schedules. Installing barricades. It was no longer just survival. It was structure. Systems. Hierarchy. A new authority forming inside the mansion. And worse, this authority was not unstable like the Rashids had been. It was efficient. Cold. Experienced. One of the militia members began speaking about expanding control zones. Beyond the house. Another mentioned nearby abandoned properties. Scouting routes. Supply chains. The children noticed it first. They're planning like this isn't temporary, Ethan said. Omar frowned. What does that mean? I didn't answer immediately. Because I already knew the answer. They're building something, I said quietly. And they don't intend to leave. That night, I ran a full diagnostic on the bunker systems. Power, stable. Food, sufficient. Water, secure. Security, intact. But something about the outside network access concerned me. There were new radio signals. Structured transmissions. Coordinated. Not random survivor chatter. Military-grade discipline. Ethan leaned over my shoulder. What is it? I hesitated. Organized groups are forming outside. Omar's expression tightened. Like the militia? Worse, I said. The militia is just one of them. Silence fell over the room. Even the younger children stopped talking. Upstairs, the cameras showed Mrs. Haida pausing in the hallway. She looked exhausted. But alert. Always alert. She stopped near a window and stared at the white world beyond. For a moment, she looked like she was trying to calculate her next move. Not for power. Not for revenge. Just survival. Then a militia guard called her name sharply. Move. She did. No argument. No resistance. Just obedience. Back in the bunker, Ethan spoke again. So what happens now? I looked at the screen. At the mansion. At the new structure forming inside it. At the snow-covered world beyond. They're not just surviving anymore, I said. They're organizing. Omar frowned. Is that bad? I paused. Yes. Because organization meant stability. And stability meant expansion. And expansion meant eventually discovery. The bunker had kept us safe because we were hidden in chaos. But chaos above us was ending. And something far more dangerous was replacing it. Chapter 11, The Ones Who Arrived Quietly. The snow outside did not stop. But the world above the mansion had changed in another way. It was no longer just scattered survivors and desperate raiders. Now there were groups. Structured ones. Coordinated ones. And sometimes, they did not come with violence. They came with patience. The cameras picked up the new arrivals just after midday. A small convoy approached the mansion. Gates, cleaner than the militias. Earlier vehicles. More disciplined in formation. They carried weapons, but not raised. Their movements were controlled, almost rehearsed. The militia met them at the entrance. Tension filled the air immediately. But there was no gunfire. No shouting. Instead, there were introductions. Words. Negotiation. And then, something unexpected. The new group submitted. They lowered their weapons. Accepted inspection. Accepted rules. Accepted protection under the militia's control. It was too smooth. Too intentional. And that alone made it dangerous. In the bunker, I watched closely. Ethan leaned forward. They're pretending, he said quietly. Omar nodded. They don't look scared enough. He was right. Real fear is messy. This group was not messy. They were controlled. Measured. Watching. Hours passed. The militia assigned them space in the lower guest wing of the mansion. Mrs. Haida was ordered to assist with registration. She moved through the task mechanically now. Like someone who had learned that resistance only made things worse. She wrote names. Recorded supplies. Counted people. That was when it happened. One of the newcomers stepped forward. A man. Tall. Calm. His eyes scanned the room with quiet precision. Then he spoke directly to Mrs. Haida. How many people survived here before we arrived? Mrs. Haida hesitated. Enough to maintain order under militia protection. The man didn't react. He simply asked the next question. And the nanny? That word made my spine tighten. The cameras zoomed in. Ethan leaned closer to the screen. Omar froze. The man continued, voice steady. Maya. Is she here? Silence. Even Mrs. Haida paused for a fraction of a second too long. That was enough. The man noticed. In the bunker, my heart slowed. I knew that voice. Not from fear. From memory. A moment buried deep in my past, the night. I had once helped a stranger survive when no one else would. A man I had believed I would never see again. Ethan turned to me slowly. You know him? I nodded. Yes. The name came back to me like something carried in the wind. Malik. Upstairs, Malik's expression did not change. But his eyes sharpened. He repeated more softly now, as if confirming it to himself. Maya is here. It was not a question anymore. Mrs. Haida straightened. I don't know what you're talking about. A lie. Badly controlled. Malik tilted his head slightly. You do. The air in the room shifted. Even the militia nearby noticed the change in tone. But Malik did not escalate. He simply stepped back. As if he had already learned what he needed. Down in the bunker, Omar looked at me. Who is he? I exhaled slowly. Someone I saved when I still thought the outside world made sense. Ethan frowned. Is he dangerous? I watched the screen again. Malik speaking calmly with militia leaders. Malik observing exits. Malik memorizing routes. Malik understanding the house faster than anyone else had. I don't know, I admitted. But I understood something else. He hadn't come here by accident. He had been looking for something. Or someone. And now he knew I was close. Above us, Malik turned slightly as the militia escorted him deeper into the mansion. For just a second, his gaze flicked downward. Not to the room. Not to the people. But toward the floor. Toward the hidden spaces beneath. As if he could feel us there. As if the mansion itself had started to whisper secrets. And for the first time since the apocalypse began, I realized the bunker was no longer invisible. Chapter 12, The Door Opens. The militia had grown careless. Power has a way of doing that, making people believe control is permanent, even in a world that no longer obeys rules. Inside the mansion, they returned to the pantry again. Mrs. Haida stood beside them, silent now, her authority completely stripped. She no longer commanded the house, she simply moved through it. Used when needed, ignored when not. But that day, she was still useful to them. She knew the final override attempts. She knew the angles. She knew the system. And she obeyed. In the bunker, alarms flickered across my monitoring screens. Ethan leaned forward. They're trying again. Omar's voice tightened. What if they get in? They won't, I said. But even as I spoke, I watched the system logs. Repeated access attempts. Forced resets. Mechanical pressure on the outer lock. The pantry door shuttered. Then, a click. For the first time, the system hesitated. The lock sequence began to fail. And then, the door started to open. Everything happened at once. As the pantry door cracked open, voices erupted upstairs. The militia surged forward. But they weren't the only ones moving. From the shadowed hallway, Malik and his men struck. It was not chaos, it was precision. Silent coordination. Targeted disarmament. Controlled force. The militia barely had time to react before they were overwhelmed. Within minutes, the balance inside the mansion collapsed. Weapons were taken. Guards were restrained. Command structures broke apart like glass. And Mrs. Haida, for the first time in what felt like years, stood in the middle of something she could not control at all. She was still alive, but no longer relevant. In the bunker, the children watched in stunned silence. Ethan whispered, "Who are they, really?" Omar shook his head. "They planned this." But I wasn't looking at the fight anymore. Because I had noticed something else. Malik wasn't scanning the room like a soldier. He was searching. Not for threats. For someone. Then it happened. The fighting slowed. The remaining militia were secured. Silence fell inside the mansion. And Malik turned. His eyes moved across the room. Past debris. Past survivors. Past confusion. Until they landed on the camera feed. On me. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The world outside the bunker felt distant. Like it had paused. Malik stepped closer to the camera. And then he smiled. Not a small smile. Not polite. Something far more intense. Relief. Recognition. Joy that had clearly been held back for far too long. "You're alive," he said softly. Even through the speakers, his voice carried emotion. Omar looked at me sharply. "You really know him?" I didn't answer right away. Because Malik was still speaking. "I looked for you everywhere," he said. "I never stopped." Then, quieter, almost as if he didn't want anyone else to hear it. "I fell in love with you the first time I saw you. Your kindness towards a stranger. That touched my heart because I'm not used to people being kind to me without them wanting something in return. But you helped and left. That said a lot about your character, especially since there was money there but you did not look at it twice. You helped me put my money safely and left." The bunker went completely silent. Even Ethan froze. Malik exhaled slowly, as if finally letting something out after months of holding it in. "I didn't know where you were," he continued. "Only that you were alive. That you had to survive no matter what. You shouldn't die before we meet again." His gaze didn't leave the camera. "And I was told something else," he added. "The government reports are changing." Behind him, the mansion was still unstable, people moving, securing, regrouping. But his voice stayed steady. "Temperatures are rising again," he said. "Slowly, but they're becoming normal." A pause. Then, "That means this isn't going to last forever." In the bunker, no one spoke for a long moment. The children looked at each other. Omar finally whispered, "So? The world is coming back." Ethan didn't look away from the screen. "If it is," he said quietly, "then everything changes again." I stayed silent. Because Malik was still looking at the camera. Still waiting. Not for an answer about the world. But for me. Chapter 13, The End of the Storm. The mansion no longer belonged to anyone. The militia had fractured after the takeover, some surrendered. Some fled into the snow, and the rest were quietly disarmed by Malik's group. What remained was a controlled, uneasy occupation. And in the middle of it all, Mrs. Haida unraveled. It happened suddenly. Not with strategy. Not with patience. But with the kind of desperate rage that comes when someone realizes they've lost every form of control they ever had. She had been watching the children from the upper corridor. Watching them laugh. Eat. Speak freely. Move without fear. And something inside her broke. "They betrayed me," she whispered. "They all betrayed me." No one heard her properly at first. Until she moved. Down in the bunker, the alarm system triggered instantly. Motion detected upstairs. Unusual movement patterns. Aggressive direction toward the lower access points. Ethan stood immediately. "Omar, something's wrong." I was already checking the feeds. Mrs. Haida had obtained a weapon from the remaining militia storage. She was moving fast. Too fast. Not toward escape. Toward the children. Lock all internal doors, I ordered the system. Metallic seals engaged throughout the bunker. But she wasn't trying to break in from outside. She was already inside the upper level of the house. And she was heading down. Malik's voice came through the communication channel. What's happening? Someone's coming down, I said. A pause. Then his tone sharpened. I'll handle it. The children gathered instinctively behind me. No shouting. No chaos. Just fear and understanding. Ethan pulled the younger ones back. Omar stepped forward slightly, then stopped, realizing there was nowhere to run. Above us, footsteps echoed through the stairwell. Fast. Uneven. Angry. Mrs. Haida's voice cracked through the hallways. You took everything from me. You ruined my life. The words weren't directed at one person anymore. They were directed at everything. Then the bunker door access corridor lit up red. Unauthorized entry attempt. Forced override. A second later, Malik appeared on the security feed. He had intercepted her halfway down. There was no long fight. No drawn-out struggle. Just a brief, final confrontation. In a narrow corridor that had once been part of a house. And was now part of a collapsing world. When it ended, Mrs. Haida fell still. The corridor went quiet. No one in the bunker spoke for a long time. Even the children didn't ask what had happened. They already understood enough. Hours later, Malik stood at the sealed entrance of the bunker. His voice came through the intercom, calm but steady. It's safe now. I hesitated before unlocking the outer seal. Slowly, the door opened. Warm air from the bunker met the colder air of the house above. But something had changed. The cold felt weaker. Less violent. Almost fading. Outside, the world was no longer what it had been. Snow still existed, but it was thinning. The sky, for the first time in months, showed patches of gray-blue instead of endless white. The storm was ending. The apocalypse was loosening its grip. Malik stepped aside as the children emerged one by one. Omar first. Then Ethan. Then the younger ones. They blinked at the light like they had forgotten what a normal world looked like. You were right, Ethan said quietly, looking at Malik. It's ending. Malik nodded once. The government confirmed it, he said. Temperature stabilization has begun. Infrastructure will return gradually. Then his eyes softened as he looked at me. And I'm not leaving you behind. For the first time in a long time, I didn't know what to say. Not because I had nothing to say, but because everything was changing too quickly to hold onto any one version of reality. The bunker had been safety. The mansion had been danger. The storm had been everything in between. And now, it was ending. Malik gestured toward the open doorway. There's a safe zone nearby, he said. Controlled. Warm. People are organizing recovery efforts. He looked at the children. You won't just survive anymore. You'll actually live. The youngest child grabbed Omar's hand. Ethan looked at me. Omar looked at his siblings. And for the first time, no one looked afraid of the future. As we stepped out into the thinning snow, I realized something simple but strange. The world hadn't ended. It had only changed long enough for us to become someone new. And now, it was ready to change again. Chapter 14, What We Keep. The offer came quietly, without pressure. Malik stood at the edge of the cleared mansion grounds, where snow had begun to melt into uneven, dirty water channels. You don't have to stay here, he said. I know, I replied. He studied me for a moment, like he was measuring whether I meant it. Then he added, come work with me. My company is rebuilding supply chains. Logistics, infrastructure, recovery planning. People who understand systems like you are rare right now. I didn't answer immediately. Because for the first time, I could imagine something that wasn't survival. Not revenge. Not hiding. Not waiting for the next disaster. Something structured. Something forward. I'll think about it, I said. That seemed enough for him. The children's maternal uncle arrived 2 days later. He was older, exhausted looking, and overwhelmed the moment he saw them. But when the children ran to him, something shifted. A familiar bond. Blood, history, recognition. They clung to him like a lifeline they hadn't known existed. Omar stayed calm, as always, but I saw the hesitation in his eyes. Ethan spoke first. You're really taking them? The uncle nodded. I am. I've been searching since the storms began easing. The younger children didn't argue. They were ready. Ready for warmth that wasn't underground. Ready for a world that didn't require sealed doors and constant fear. When they left, the bunker felt quieter than it ever had. Not empty. Just finished. Omar was the last to step out. He looked back at me. You're coming too, right? I'll follow, I said. It wasn't a promise. But it wasn't a lie either. He nodded like he understood both meanings. Then he left with his siblings. And for the first time, I was alone again, but not in the same way as before. The mansion changed after that. Without the militia, without the Rashid family, without the chaos of survival factions, it became something strange. Silent. Functional. Almost like a forgotten system waiting to be reconfigured. And I began to move through it carefully. Not emotionally. Practically. I knew exactly what I was looking for now. Hidden storage. Emergency funds. Safe deposit access codes. Physical cash reserves. Jewelry vaults Mrs. Haida had maintained long before the apocalypse, believing wealth would always survive collapse. She had been right about that part. Just not in the way she expected. I documented everything. Separated what was traceable and what wasn't. Then I packed only what mattered. Money. Documents. Portable valuables. Encrypted storage devices. Things that would matter in a rebuilt world, not a broken one. The amounts were excessive. More than I needed. More than I had ever imagined touching in my life. I didn't feel excitement. Only clarity. Because I wasn't taking it out of greed. I was taking it out of inevitability. The system above had collapsed once. I wasn't going to depend on it again. When the military recovery team returned to secure the remaining mansion supplies, I did not stop them. They catalogued what was left in the pantry. The food stocks. The emergency reserves. The bunker provisions that had once felt like a kingdom. Let them take it. That part of the world belonged to everyone now. Before I left, I made one final decision. I divided what I had taken. Half would stay with me. Half would go to the children. Not because I owed them, but because they were no longer the Rashid children. They were survivors of something none of them chose. And survival deserved continuity, not separation. I arranged for Malik to deliver it through secure channels once they were settled. He didn't question it. He just nodded once. "That sounds like you," he said. That night, I stood in the empty mansion one last time. The cameras were off. The bunker doors were open. The snow outside was thin enough to see broken ground beneath it. The apocalypse was no longer a wall. It was a memory. I looked around the house that had once been my prison. Then my control center. Then my battlefield. Now, just a place. And I realized something simple. I had taken everything they used to define me. Fear. Control. Isolation. And turned it into something that could no longer hold me. Outside, Malik waited. A new world was already forming beyond the gates. And for the first time, I walked toward it without looking back. Malik's company was nothing like the world I had known before. It wasn't built on appearances or inherited power, it was built on systems that actually had to work. Supply chains for rebuilding cities. Emergency infrastructure for warming regions still recovering from the collapse. Housing projects for displaced families. I started at the bottom of it all again. But this time, I wasn't trapped. I was learning, building, and choosing. Coding turned into real systems. Business lessons turned into decisions that affected entire regions. The same mind that had once studied survival in a locked bunker now studied how to rebuild what the world had lost. And Malik kept his promise, not as a savior, but as someone who treated me like an equal. We didn't rush anything. We didn't need to. What we had survived had already done the rushing for us. The children were safe. Their maternal uncle took them to a warmer country where recovery was faster and schools had already reopened. Omar kept in touch the most, always sending updates. Always checking in like he still felt responsible for everyone. Ethan adjusted quickly. He always had that quiet strength. The younger ones healed in their own ways, slowly, unevenly, but forward. And every so often, I would send them something from my share of what I had taken from the mansion. Carefully, quietly, without making it feel like charity. Not because they needed me anymore, but because we were still connected by what we had lived through. The Rashid mansion itself was eventually absorbed into the recovery zone. Administration. The bunker systems were studied, then repurposed to support emergency housing elsewhere. Nothing there stayed the same. And that was fine. Because nothing needed to. Months passed. Then a year. The snow was gone now in most places, replaced by rain. Then green again in patches that felt almost unreal after everything. The world had not gone back to what it was. It had become something new. Better in some ways. Harsher in others. But alive. One evening, Malik and I stood outside a half-finished transit hub watching workers move through the structure. "You ever think about going back?" he asked. "To where?" I replied. He smiled slightly. "Exactly." There was a pause between us, comfortable, not empty. Then he added, "You know? I meant what I said back then." I glanced at him. "I know," I said simply. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to run from it. Later that night, I received a message from Omar. Just a photo. All of them together. Smiling. No fear in their eyes anymore. Under it, a single line. We're okay. You were right. Family is who stays. I stared at it for a long time. Then I saved it. Nothing in the world had returned to how it was before the snow. But I didn't want it to. Because I had stopped surviving. I had started living. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.